All right. So, if that's the idea, what then are the keys to classroom success? How can you, as a student, try to get the most out of the classroom experience? And let me suggest that there are 4 things you can focus on. The first is what you do before class, and that is your preparation. Okay, so the preparation before class, that's an important part of it. Next, what do you do during class? And there's 2 pieces to think about here. First, active engagement while you're in the classroom. Okay, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But also, during class, you want to think about what are effective strategies for taking notes, to record what's going on in the classroom so that you can look at it later on. And then lastly, what do you do after class? The post-class review. Those 4 things are keys to success in getting the most you can out of the classroom experience. So let's talk about each of them. All right? First, let's talk about preparation before class. The first one is not going to surprise you at all. Okay? You got to read the material. Look, every class that you're going to take, certainly property and civil procedure and torts and those doctrinal classes that you take, are driven by what's going on in the material that you had to read for class that day. So if you haven't read it, if you haven't analyzed it and thought about it, you're not going to be ready to get the most out of the classroom experience. So you need to read the material that is assigned for the class. All right? Most of the time, you're going to be reading cases. All right? So you have to work to understand the cases. And that includes understanding what the facts of the case are, understanding what the holding of the case was, and understanding the bases, the reasons why the court reached the conclusion that it did. Now, in the next video, we're going to talk more about reading cases. All right? But for now, it's important. You're reading the material, and in a case context, you want to make sure that you understand the facts, you understand the holding, and you understand the bases or the reasons for the holding. All right? And just as important, you want to make sure that you read the material that follows the case in your casebook. Because a lot of times what's going on there is that you're going to see the authors of the casebook are giving you things like variations on the rule, or sometimes additional information about the rule that you've just learned by reading the main case in the casebook. Right? For example, in our second week of classes, we're going to be reading about bailments. And there's a case that talks about a bailment. And following it in the notes, we're going to find out things such as courts recognize really 2 different kinds of bailments. Bailments for hire and gratuitous bailments. And it also tells us that those different types of bailments have different tests. If it's for hire, we're going to apply one standard of care. If it's a gratuitous bailment, we apply a different one. You learn all that by reading the notes after the bailment case. So it's important to read the information that follows the case, because a lot of times that gives you some additional help, some additional information about the case or the materials that you've read. All right? So before class, you want to make sure you've read the material and you have a good understanding of it. That makes you ready to participate in the class. All right, so now you get to class. Well, what do you want to do? You want to be actively engaged in the class. All right? And what does that mean? Well, first, it means you want to follow along. All right? If you're the person being called on, trust me, you're going to be actively engaged. Right? But if you're not the person who's called on, you need to follow along. You can't be sitting there and checking your email or shopping on the internet or whatever it is. Okay? You need to follow along with the discussion. because you can learn even though you're not the person being called on. As a matter of fact, that's the expectation, that you are going to be following along and learning even though you're not the person being called upon. All right, well, how do you do that? Well, obviously you're following along, but also just as important, what you want to do is answer the questions that are being asked. So if the professor says, all right, well, what if the plaintiff didn't do this? You know, we have a hypothetical, change the facts a little bit. And the question is, well, does the plaintiff still have a cause of action? Well, answer that question in your own head. Because by answering it, you're engaging in the mental processes, and then you get to see whether or not you got it right. Because that's important for you to develop those thinking skills. So you want to make sure that you're following along with the discussion, you're answering the questions so that you're participating in the mental process that is going on in the classroom. Right? And just as important, active engagement means asking questions. You know, Professor, I don't understand how that fact or that change in the facts should affect the ultimate outcome, because it still seems like the plaintiff has, you know, established this and done this else. Why does that one fact change the outcome? Ask questions. If you don't understand, it's very important for you to ask so that you could try to clarify. Right? That's part and parcel of the classroom experience. Now, I know that for the vast majority of students, especially when you're first starting out, asking questions is perhaps even more traumatic than being the person called upon. And the reason why is because, well, you don't want to look, you know, stupid in front of your fellow classmates or in front of the professor, whatever. Okay? Look, number one, there are no stupid questions in law school, especially in your first year. I mean, this is all brand new to you. So it's okay to ask, okay? Trust me, there are no stupid questions. Second, you think, oh, I'm going to look stupid in front of my fellow classmates. I will bet you that the overwhelming majority of the time, the question you ask is a question that has occurred to at least 5 other people in the room, and they just didn't raise their hand to ask it. All right? So by asking questions, you're helping your fellow students to learn as well as learning yourself. So ask questions in the classroom. Make sure that you're following along, and you are going to get a lot more out of the classroom experience, because the professors expect you to get the things you need to learn through that classroom experience. So delve into it, engage actively to try to learn. All right, so you want to be following along, you want to be asking questions, etc., but you also need to be taking notes as to what's going on. All right, so some concepts on note-taking. All right, first, most importantly, avoid transcription. Okay, you can't do it unless you are a professional court reporter and you bring in your court reporting machine. You are not going to get down every word that is said. And the problem with trying to transcribe is that you're focused on the words and you're not focused on what the words mean. More often than not, if you're trying to write down exactly what was said, you're writing words that were said 10, 15, 20 seconds ago, and in the meantime, you're kind of missing out on the words that are being said right now. All right? So transcribing is ultimately going to be very frustrating. It's really, really hard to do well. Avoid it. Instead, think of note-taking as trying to capture the key points that are being discussed in class. All right? So what might those key points be? Well, clearly if we're talking about looking at a case and the case ultimately tells us a rule, well, we need to get the rule down, right? And if there are variations on the rule that may come out because of the hypotheticals or maybe the notes as they're following the case and talked about in class, you want to get those down, right? So at the end of it, you want to know, okay, these are the elements of a copyright claim or a bailment claim. And here's how it can vary. Right? Those are key things, key points that you want to get. Also, what are the key facts? Because that can help you to understand how the rule plays out. All right? My suggestion is that for taking notes, what you ought to do is use the PowerPoint slides as a starting point. Because the PowerPoint slides already give you some information that you won't have to write down. They create a structure in which you can fill in notes as you're going along. Right? If you use them, you're going to find much less temptation to transcribe. You're going to find a ready-made structure to what's going on, and you can fill in. You can fill in by what's written up on the smartboard. You can fill in by things you hear in class. Right? But view that as a good way to take notes during class, because that makes the load easier for you. It allows you to have a little bit more freedom to actively engage in the class and still record what you need to know while the class is going on. Now, so that's what's going on in class. How about post-class? What do you do afterwards? All right? Well, I think what's important about post-class is that you need to review. You need to review what happened in class. All right? And part of that review is designed to make sure you understand what just happened, what came out of it, what are the important things you want to know. So the first thing about post-class review is the sooner you do it, the better off you are, because everything is going to be fresh in your mind. Right? It may make sense for you to take 5-10 minutes after class and just look at your notes and make sure, okay, I've got it, or, oh, that was something else I wanted to fill in. You know, make sure your notes are complete and that you understand it. Okay? So you can fill in, make sure you got all the points. All right? And then, you know, maybe it generates a question and you can come talk to me or talk to the professor about it. But you want to make sure that you got what the class was about. And then that helps you when we go down the road and we start developing outlines or whatever. We're going to be taking this information out of the classes and distilling it in a way that allows you to remember it for your final exam and also for the various things we're going to be doing during class and afterwards. Okay? So, get the key points, make sure that they're in your notes. The podcasts can help. Podcasts are short, topic-specific recordings that I have made that try to help distill down the essential points about particular topics. So, there's a podcast on copyrights. There's a podcast on trademarks. There are, I believe, 32 different podcasts for Property 1. And you can listen to them and make sure that your notes, or ultimately your outline, reflect the key concepts that you need to remember about a particular topic area. So use the podcasts. They can help you after class. Make sure you got everything that went on during class. All right? And also, ask questions. Come to me after class or before class. Come to me in my office. If you aren't sure that you understand it, by having a conversation together, we can figure that out and help you to get to the point where you do understand. Because that's the goal. That's what the classroom experience is all about. You want to learn these rules while also starting to develop those skills. And by doing those two things together, your classroom experience can be maximized so you get the most out of it that you can, and can be the best prepared when it comes time to make your outlines and ultimately to perform on the final exam. All right, my last set of advice. Attend the workshop with the TA. All right? The TA is going to have a workshop talking about classroom note-taking. And so what you want to do is you want to get some insights. The TA is a senior student here, someone who's been through the process a little bit.